Here's why I'm going to vote for the Conservatives in Monday's election. I've got two different kinds of reasons. Reasons to vote for the Conservatives and reasons to vote against the Liberals and the NDP. I'll start with the negative reasons, the things I want to avoid. I mean, the best things about Stephen Harper aren't what he did, it's what he didn't do, what he didn't allow to happen under his watch. In the great 2008 recession, for example, he didn't panic. He spent more than he should have spent, which I attribute in part to him being in a minority government back then, so he had to spend enough to get Liberal support for his budget. But he didn't do a full Obama. He didn't start huge new entitlement programs like Obamacare. He didn't go crazy. Yes, he bailed out the auto industry, but again, under duress. Had he not put in proportionately what Obama did, the Canadian car factories would have been shut down altogether. So he kept his wits when everyone around him was losing theirs. He didn't raise taxes. Actually, he cut them. And Canada is back in a government surplus now, unlike the United States. The official U.S. unemployment rate looks a bit better than ours on paper, but that's deceptive because so many millions of Americans have completely given up hope looking for work, so they've dropped out of the labor force, so they're not even counted anymore. Canada's taxes are actually more competitive than the U.S. now, too. That's unheard of. So that's the first thing Harper didn't do that I like. The dog that didn't bark. He didn't ruin the economy. He didn't create huge new welfare programs and permanently add millions to the welfare class. Do you think for a moment that those things would be true if we would have had a Liberal or NDP government during the Great Recession? Or remember, as they tried to do in 2008, a Liberal NDP bloc coalition. Imagine the spending and taxing and regulating that would have come from that. The second thing that Harper didn't do was get into battles with the provinces. Unlike Liberals, he doesn't demonize and torment Alberta to delight Central Canadians. Unlike the Liberals, he doesn't engage in age-old feuds with different factions in Quebec. Quebec separatism, which dominated Canadian politics since the 1970s, has been in the freezer under Stephen Harper. Part of that is simply because Harper shoveled money at Quebec, but part of it is because he didn't take the bait to quarrel with them over everything and anything. He didn't give them a target. He didn't try to settle old scores, and he generally respected our Constitution, letting provinces handle matters of provincial jurisdiction. And unlike Paul Martin's Liberals, he didn't balance his budget by cutting transfers to the provinces. Harper didn't bring in a carbon tax or a cap in trade like Stéphane Dion, the Liberal, proposed in his Green Shift in 2008, and like every American-funded NGO from David Suzuki to Preston Manning would do. Which is interesting because greenhouse gas emissions have actually declined under the Conservatives, unlike the Liberals before them. Now, I happen to know that carbon dioxide is a colorless, odorless, naturally occurring gas that all life on Earth depends on. It's what plants use for food. We'd all die without it. So I don't buy the junk science that it's somehow pollution. Harper has given too much rhetorical support to the theory that greenhouse gas emissions are a problem, but thankfully he hasn't slaughtered industry like the parties of the left and the NGOs and the media would have had him do. If you want to see an alternative history, what could have been, look at what Ontario has done to itself with their insane war on carbon dioxide, shutting down economical clean coal power plants, subsidizing scandalous wind turbines that rarely work, giving Ontario the highest power prices in North America. That just this week claimed another victim. Caterpillar shut down its last diesel plant in Ontario, laying off another 50 people. Oh, and they're about to jack up provincial payroll taxes in Ontario too. Both of those Kathleen Wynne Liberal policies happen to exactly be Trudeau's federal Liberal policies, and the power behind the throne of the last Ontario Premier, Dalton McGuinty, was none other than Gerald Butts, who's now Justin Trudeau's chief advisor. That's your alternative history for the past 10 years. High power prices, high taxes, have-not economy, huge debt. That is what could have been without Harper and will be without him. So that's what Harper didn't do. That's what he spared us. But what did he do? Well, lowering taxes and balancing budgets made us an economic winner again, but Harper also made us an international moral force in a way that we hadn't been in decades. Harper stopped the Liberal tradition of defaming our armed forces, choosing instead to give it moral support and financial support. It was Paul Martin who sent and Jean Chrétien who sent Canadian troops to Afghanistan, but Harper improved and managed that mission and finally ended it. It's Harper who had us join in the battle against the Islamic State terrorists, something that Trudeau mocks as old men whipping out their CF-18s. No, it's democracies fighting together to stop the Nazis of our day. Most of the time, Canada's foreign policy doesn't involve military might. It involves moral might, knowing right from wrong, like denouncing terrorism and anti-Semitism, like talking about human rights in China, which, by the way, hasn't dampened our trade with that country one bit. Canada has been the world's most articulate defender of Ukraine against Vladimir Putin's predations, and we've been a force for true liberty at the United Nations. And you know that's true when all the dictatorships ganged up on us and voted us off the Security Council a few years ago. Compare that to what would have happened under Trudeau. He has said he'd immediately quit the military mission against the Islamic State terrorists. He'd abandoned their victims of murder and rape, promising instead to give them warm blankets for the winter. Trudeau makes jokes about Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine. And then there's this execrable comment about China. Take a listen.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime.
Trudeau would be hostile to our friends, but he promises to normalize relations with our enemies, like Iran. It's partly his natural inheritance from his father, Pierre Trudeau, who never met a dictator he didn't like. Trudeau also irritated America. Pierre Trudeau irritated America, which needed our support in the Cold War. By the way, how friendly do you think the U.S., even under Obama, will be to Justin Trudeau if he bails out on the mission against the Islamic State? Yeah. Trudeau would turn off our light of liberty around the world. He would show weakness to our enemies and sometimes even friendship to them, like Iran and China. Seriously, what kind of a man says he admires China precisely for its most evil characteristic, its dictatorship? Part of that is Trudeau's worldview. He truly admires authoritarian regimes. His brother was a filmmaker paid for by the state of Iran. But part of this is for domestic political consumption, and that's the part that troubles me the most. There's a huge theme to Trudeau's campaign. Support for the face-obscuring Muslim veil called the niqab. Opposition to C-24, the bill that would strip convicted terrorists of their citizenship. His support for Omar Khadr, the al-Qaeda terrorist. His demand that Canada take in tens of thousands of Syrian migrants by Christmas time, and his demand that they be Muslim, not the victim groups, the Christians or Yazidis or Kurds. There's a theme here, and it goes to his candidates too, not just Omar al-Jabra, his Muslim chief who used to run the pro-Hezbollah Canadian Arab Federation, but other candidates like Tariq Chowdhury of Edmonton, who tried to bring a Muslim hate preacher in from India to proselytize in Edmonton, or Ala Bazreba, the pro-Hamas extremist in Calgary. How many data points does it take before you say, you know, this is not a coincidence? This is a strategy. Justin Trudeau isn't just pro-Muslim, he's pro-Islamist, and he actually opposes our war on terror. The NDP are just as bad. They're even more pro-niqab. They oppose Bill C-51, the anti-terrorism law. Trudeau just says he'll repeal certain parts of it. But the NDP has always been pacifist, always anti-military, always surrenderist, always a fringe. But the Liberals have a reputation of at least occasionally being responsible and grown-up, of understanding the burdens of office. Not Trudeau. He has taken the Liberals not just to the left, but to the Islamist left, to the pro-terrorist left. That's the inescapable conclusion I come to based on his views and statements. Now, Stephen Harper has made his mistakes, and after 9 years, there's plenty of fatigue with him personally, but seriously, is the worst ethical flaw of 9 years in office and thousands of appointees that his Chief of Staff, Nigel Wright, cut a $90,000 check to the government from his own bank account to repay some iffy expense claims from a senator? Is that the totality of the moral case against Stephen Harper, that one of his staff actually paid from his own money to the government? Isn't a scandal normally politicians falsely taking money from the government, like the Liberals did under AdScam, or like the NDPs are doing right now, those who illegally ran party offices using millions in parliamentary money? And that's the final thing to me. In Canada, there is a drumbeat against Harper, led by the opinion elites, the media party, but also let's call it the court party, and the professors, and the NGOs, all the elite opinion, all the fancy people. They all hate Harper, and I mean they hate him. They don't just disagree with him, it's hate. I call it Harper derangement syndrome, and it's incoherent. You ask what the source of the hate is, and you get the same weird laundry list, like he's making the long-form census non-mandatory. Come on, that's an issue for you? his war against the environment. Really like what? He reduced greenhouse gas emissions, if you care. But look, it's nuts. That's what an obsession always is. Ever since the 2008 election, there has been an attempt by the opinion elites to delegitimize Harper democratically, to actually claim that he stole the election, to claim that he's a dictator or a censor. The irony of that, he's the man whose party voted to repeal the censorship rule in the Human Rights Act, but these Harper haters have demonized him, even compared him to Hitler, like that nut from the CBC, Mary Walsh did. Remember this?
So, help save poor Stassi Steve this season. God knows here Harper doesn't have enough sense to save himself, so let's bring him a load of sense.
The elites hate Harper because he's not one of them. He's from Calgary, not Montreal, Ottawa, or Toronto. He's an economist, not a lawyer or a lobbyist. He's the most normal guy in 24 Sussex Drive since Joe Clark. And by normal, I mean he's not a millionaire who worked for Power Corporation, unlike Chrétien or Mulrooney. If Harper loses, he's not going to make big bucks as a lobbyist afterwards. He doesn't have the right kind of friends. I want Stephen Harper to win because I want our economy strong, I want our national security safe, and I want our presence in the world to be one of freedom and democracy. Under the NDP or the Liberals, I see our national industries hamstrung. I see the oil industry demonized. I see entrepreneurs snuffed out. I see Muslim extremism welcomed, and the country returned to the same Laurentian elites as always. That's why I'm voting for the Conservatives on Monday. And I hope enough Canadians ignore the media party's campaign. Seriously, the Journalists Union, the Canadian Media Guild, actually registered as a campaign group against Harper. I hope enough Canadians ignore the leftist snobs in the national media and vote for the boring accountant, not the spoiled trust fund rich kid, and not the socialist lawyer. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.